Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Watson, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Brighton. It's a great pleasure to welcome so many friends of the university and of Andrzej Jackowski to this second inaugural professorial lecture of the session. Professor Jackowski is Professor of Painting in the School of Arts and Communication. He's the university's 75th professor. Andrzej Jackowski has taught at the Polytechnic and the university since 1987. At that stage, he was already a renowned artist, having had his first major exhibition at the Marlborough Fine Art Gallery. He's been back there several times since, having won the Tolly Cobbold Eastern Arts Prize, and having enjoyed a distinguished career as a student and a fellow at Camberwell, Falmouth, the Royal College of Art, and then the University of Surrey. His subsequent reputation and the respect in which he's held have grown apace. In 1993, he moved from the Marlborough to Purdy Hicks, and his exhibitions have travelled the world, from Brighton to Warsaw, Frankfurt, Kilkenny, and Dublin. In 1999, he won first prize at the John Moores exhibition in Liverpool. You'll see from his work, including the work we've been enjoying in the gallery, how evocative and how disturbing it can be. As one of the leading figures in our top-ranked research group, he's explored the issues of memory, identity, and culture to a peak of expressiveness. This expressiveness is partly about his own experiences, of a family history in Poland, of dispossession, of the dislocation of a childhood in a refugee camp, and partly about a powerful capacity to communicate, especially states of what he calls vigilant dreaming. However, in addition to his practice and his research, Andrzej is also a masterly teacher in the very best tradition of this institution. His colleagues and his students speak of him with not only admiration, but also affection and gratitude. He has that special talent of being able to help students to find and maintain a place of their own to stand. And that's shone through the development of our final year painting shows in the past few years. We're all looking forward to hearing what he has to say tonight under his title, At the Lining of Things. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Andrzej Jackowski.
Przejść, dzieci. Dzień jest cudowny, taka wiosna w powietrzu, puszki zielenią się na drzewach. Idźcie się przejść, dzieci. Widziałam nawet 2 motyle cytrynki. Nie wiedzą nieszczęśliwe, że kwiatów jeszcze nie ma i że czeka je śmierć głodowa. Idźcie się przejść, dzieci. Dzień jest cudowny, taka wiosna, taki cudowny dzień. Dzieci, idźcie się przejść! Dalej! No! Jeszcze!
My mother hated this painting. She loved me, but hated this painting. That's better. I had painted it in one of the live painting classes on the foundation course at Camberwell School of Art in London towards the end of 1966, when I was 19. It's oil on board, about 2 foot by 2. Camberwell, at that time, had a strict academic regime, drawing and painting from the life model, copying from casts and painting from the old and not so old masters. At the National Gallery, and the V&A. I think my mother hated this painting because she felt it was a portrait of her, looking sad, lost, and like a refugee, which in fact she was, having escaped from Poland in 1939 at the start of the war, and eventually, after much travelling through Europe and North Africa, meeting my father in Italy, ended up in a refugee camp in the north of England, where I was brought up till we came to London when I was 11. Looking back, I think in a way it was a portrait of her, and the first inkling of the subject matter which was to emerge in my early 30s. I have only a slide of the painting now, as one day when I returned from college, I found the painting missing. My mother denied it, but I presumed it had been thrown out. Yes, a severe critic, but such is the power of images and their ability to resurrect the past and disturb the present. After Camberwell, I was recommended to study at Falmouth School of Art in Cornwall, then the smallest art school in the country. There was about 10 of us in the year. There I found the painting staff to be evenly split between working and teaching in the Camberwell Euston Road detached academic manner, and the younger staff pushing a kind of academic, American, abstract, expressionistic colour field painting. Unable to relate to either way of working, I started initially to make sculptures in various materials, including welded steel and copper. In the second year, I started to make films. Part of one you saw at the beginning. The way of working on the films in a non-narrative and improvised way came out of poetry workshops run by the poet Peter Redgrove. In the workshops, we were introduced to the world of the surrealists and the importance of the unconscious. We were introduced to ways of working with the unconscious through automatic writing and the exercise called the exquisite corpse, where you write something, turn it over, and somebody else writes something. The writing and the making of the films I found very liberating. I felt it was a way of getting hold of images, a way of getting access to my inner world that felt more real and mysterious than the detached looking and academic copying of the outside world. At the end of my second year at Falmouth, the painting staff felt they could not evaluate the films, that they had no expertise in that area. I was not painting, so I was asked to leave the course. Perhaps all those hours playing table tennis didn't help. After feeling lost, confused and dejected for a while, I started reading and writing poetry with my partner then, who was a writer. As well, I started drawing with my left hand. As with the exquisite corpse exercise, to break the pattern of conscious thought and representation. As I drew and painted with my left hand, certain shapes, signs and figures started to recur, which I then isolated. I started building up a vocabulary, a kind of personal hoard of signs and hieroglyphs. Fragments of some forgotten language. Around about 1970, I came across the work of the American painter living in London, R.B. Kitaj. The painting on the left is the right-hand panel of a work called Erie's Shore, 1966, and on the right, the right-hand panel of a diptych called Synchrony with F.B., General of Hot Desire, 1968. Chrissy Shrimpton and Francis Bacon meeting in some hotspot in Soho. What I found to be a revelation about Kitaj's paintings was the way they were structured, the flat, rather cool way of painting, and the way he tapped into the collective contemporary unconscious. But perhaps the most important element at that time was that you could use all sorts of sources for painting: photographs, images from magazines and films, texts, and that this enabled him to capture the many layers of our mind, a way of thinking. These two paintings from about 1972, where I use oil and silver spray and cut up images of stills from Jean-Luc Godard's film Alphaville, the city of the future, and the strange and painful adventure of Special Agent Lemmy Caution. Another group of images I was looking at that time was Indian tantric art. These two images of mine, they're pretty small. One of them you can see in the show. They're ink and gouache on paper. There had been a big show of tantric art, which I saw at the Hayward Gallery in 1971, curated by Philip Rawson, who was later to be one of my tutors at the Royal College of Art. I was attracted to the images as well as the concept of this art. That images are a way of knowledge. That through ritual and meditation on these images, the viewer was able to find hidden aspects of themselves and the world around them, and in the process heal the body and mind, a mapping of the energy of the body, mind, and universe. After a few years of working with these images, I found myself dissatisfied, feeling that the overarching, universal framework of the images to be too abstract and generalized, and the manner of working too rigid and stilted. The idea of the image as knowledge has remained, but I wanted the paint to do more. I wanted to use the paint in a more visceral way and let it carry more of the thoughts and feelings. In Francis Bacon's phrase, to touch the central nervous system more directly. In 1974, I started the MA course at the Royal College of Art. In the previous year, after 3 years out of college, I finished my degree course at Falmouth. The painting staff, after seeing some of my work in a mixed show in St Ives, had offered my place back on the course. I can't quite remember how I came across the work of the French painter de Buffet and the art brew artist, sometimes called outsider art. But on arriving at the RCA, I started painting and scratching and improvising, and if not literally working with my left hand, at least thinking the left-hand way. These two works are by Jean Rad on the left and Jules Doe on the right. These two outsider artists, though insider artists perhaps is a better name, lived and worked most of their adult lives in a psychiatric clinic in Lausanne. I felt with their work, what I wanted in my work was to go back to working directly with the energy and images of the inner world. Something authentic, and something of the real self, rather than the false self of the trained, rational mind. I felt they were able to remain fluid and alert to the world, but as well to be closer to the real idiom of the imagination. And that because of their illness, they had been able to bypass conscious controls and self-censorship. What I liked about these drawings, and still do, is their bold way of drawing, their inventive wit, and the way they use the images of the body to evoke inner states of mind. The drawing on the right is, I presume, an image of the journey of the relationships of William Tell and his boy, the apple of his eye. These two paintings of mine, Room with a View 1 and 2, were painted in the second year at the RCA. They're about 4'6" by 6 foot, all on canvas. They were painted after spending several weeks in the printmaking department, working on a series of etchings. Some of them are on show next door. The images are scratched and painted with rags on a smooth, primed surface. At the end of the second year, I was given a scholarship to study the Art Brut collection, housed by de Buffet in a museum in Lausanne. After seeing the collection and being initially amazed by the energy, skill and power of the drawings, paintings and sculptures on show, I began to question whether I could go much further with this way of working. I was not particularly mentally ill. I had been to several art schools. Could I, as Timothy Hyman writes in the catalogue for the drawing show, could I carry on with the aesthetic of autism? On the way back from Lausanne, in an exhibition in Paris, I came across, for the first time, the work of the Polish painter Balthus, and later, back in reproductions, the Italian painter Carlo Carra. On the left, The Room, 1947, by Balthus, and on the right, Carlo Carra's The House of Love, 1922. Seeing their work, and in particular the way the figure in a particular space was embraced by time and memory, and in talks with my professor at the RCA, Peter de Francia, made me realise that I could evoke the inner states of mind I was interested in by using the then discarded traditional figurative language that goes back to Giotto. With space, light and shadow manipulated and changed to my own needs. In 1977, in my last year at the RCA, I went back to drawing and painting from life. Family, friends, objects, and particular spaces. I was drawing and painting particular people, objects and spaces, constructing vessels and traps for and of the inner world. The apprenticeship was over. After leaving the Royal College, I initially started working back in Brighton, and then at the University of Surrey, where I was artist in residence for 18 months. Working in a basement underneath the lecture rooms, running drawing workshops, mostly with physics students, and doing lots of not very good paintings. In December 1980, 3 years after leaving the RCA, while reading The Sleepwalkers by Arthur Koestler, a history of our way of looking at the universe, I had one of those Proustian moments where a passage describing Copernicus, the Polish astronomer, living in his tower with the open view of the stars at night, brought back memories of lying in bed as a child, in the camp, and thinking those awesome black hole kind of thoughts of how the world came to be and how it would end. I had been drawing various spaces, objects, people, and moods that interested me, but not knowing quite what to do with them. Suddenly, the passage in Koestler's book provided the glue to bring them together. I started to paint the Tower of Copernicus on the right and finished it in 3 weeks, which is fast for me. Initially, Copernicus was standing in front of the wooden ark, as in the drawing you can see on the left bottom. But in the end, he had to go, as the whole space became a state of mind, a container for reverie. The paintings over the next 10 years during the 80s vary in size between 5 foot by 4 and 5 foot by 8. Gaston Bachelard, in his seminal book, The Poetics of Space, called this kind of space a praiseworthy space, a space that attracts and concentrates the poetic imagination, a space for and of intimacy and immensity, a space of childhood. I had somehow stumbled onto images that resonated with the refugee huts of my childhood, made out of wood, tar and blankets, but as well a space that echoed with the trauma, loss and the resilience of the time my parents had been through in the war and since, of losing their homes and families, as well as their sense of place in the world. We had been cut adrift from a sense of home. John Berger, writing in an article in 1983, "A home is not a house," wrote, "The mortar which holds the improvised home together, even for a child, is memory. Within it, tangible, visible mementos are arranged, photos, trophies, souvenirs. But the roof and four walls which safeguard the lives within, these are invisible, intangible, and biographical." Over the next few years, other containers of space appeared, allowing other feelings and thoughts to emerge. Though my work comes out of the space of my childhood, it's not a fixed space where I go back and pluck out memories. The space of my childhood is a vibrant source of energy and memory. That is, as Berger states, is being constantly improvised on. There is a constant refurbishment and renewal of our childhood home throughout our life. These two paintings, Vigilant Dreamer and The Vigilant One, initially started from a simple observational drawing of my daughter in a dreamy, waking up state. As I worked on the paintings and changed the scale and weight of the head and brought in the smaller images, a sense of a dreamer, or rather a sense of reverie, emerged. A reverie of being in touch with the past, but not just individual memories, but a sense of the space where memories and stories come from. In his novel, The Sanatorium Under the Hourglass, the Polish-Jewish writer Bruno Schulz, in John Updike's phrase, one of the great transmogrifiers of the world into words, writes in a vivid, emblematic way about this space where memories and stories come from. But we have not finished yet. We can go deeper. There's nothing to fear. Give me your hand. Take another step. We are at the roots now, tangled like in the depth of a forest. We are on the nether side, in gloom, stitched with phosphorescence, at the lining of things. Some images come from direct drawing. some images come from found sources, like magazines and books. This painting, Diving into the Wreck, was triggered by a photograph of a fisherman on a lake with his paraphernalia of rods. Sometimes the trigger for a painting is an image from another artist. In this painting, The Fir Tree, the figure comes from a work by Paula Waddesdon-Becker. These images that I find that interest me, I paste into albums, a deposit of images to be drawn on, which are then cooked, so to speak, in paint, memory, and process. These two paintings, Settlement and Settlement with Three Towers, 1986, were triggered off by a photograph of a Viking burial boat which had been unearthed somewhere in Denmark. As I painted these images, they struck me to be images not only of something dead that had been buried, but as well images of blooming and ripening, like a womb opening, a fruit shedding its seeds, a settlement being reborn. The images reminded me of poems by Seamus Heaney, where he writes of blocks of butter, whole elks, a child's tongue that had been dug up, preserved from the peat bogs of Ireland. A buried history of the imagination of a tribe. I wanted in my work, in the words of the American poet Adrian Rich, to dive into the wreck, to explore the wreck, to explore the damage that was done, but as well to explore the treasures that prevail. At the beginning of her book of poems, Diving into the Wreck, Rich has a kind of health warning for this kind of exploration. She has a quote from Andrzej Breton, the founder of the Surrealist movement. Perhaps my life is nothing but an image of this kind. Perhaps I am doomed to trace my steps under the illusion that I'm exploring, doomed to try and learn what I should simply recognize, learning a mere fraction of what I have forgotten. In 1992, after finishing this painting, The Beekeeper's Son, I felt a certain way of exploring was coming to an end. This buzzing life box of preserved fruit, memory and desire, made out of wood, paint, canvas and wax, was an end of a chapter. In 1992, I felt the need for change. I wanted to lose that phosphorescent gloom. The images over the years had become clogged up, overcooked with fairy tale time. I wanted something more austere and emblematic. An image that contained more with less. I wanted to refocus. Seamus Heaney talks about poems and individual words as depth charges, and the skill of making a poem as being able to drop a bucket down the well of ourselves. In his phrase, a way to open the skin on the pool of ourselves. I wanted in my work to drop that bucket further down the well. As always, I turned to drawing, and for several months dropped the bucket down the well, and brought up nothing but air. But one day, I felt the drawing chain tighten, and the image of the boy standing by a table emerged, with a tree hovering with intent, like a rootless angel. "20 years earlier, I had pasted in one of my albums a photograph of a boy standing by a table, holding a candle, dressed in his white suit on his first communion, a ritual of a rite of passage. It was only when I was putting the drawing retrospective together that I discovered that I had also drew a boy standing by a table in around 1978, which at that time didn't lead to anything. The time has to be ripe for an image to emerge. Most of the work over the next 10 years is between 5 foot and 5 by 6. In 1994, in an essay for my first exhibition at Purdy Hicks Gallery in London, titled Reveries of Dispossession, the writer, Gabriel Josephovici, describes the table as a sign and symbol of the human, and we need them for two quintessential human activities: communal eating and solitary working. And that the table in the paintings, I quote, were less a simple surface than a laboratory of human making and remaking. This painting is called Tearing Apart. This is a child in the dark. Toxic tank. The boy who broke the spell. Standing train. The space, the objects and the figures in the paintings, woven with line, colour, texture, the matter of painting, carry the energy of the constant making and the remaking of memory, thoughts and feelings in a structured way. They contain and capture the fleeting energy of a particular time, a unique living reality. This making and remaking, though, works in two ways. The living reality of an image are not just templates of the artists in the world, but a potential realization of the viewers in the world. The starting point for these two paintings, Father and Son 2 and 3, was a photograph of a tribesman and his son, all dressed up in their ceremonial best, wearing symbols of their status and standing in the tribe. as I worked on the paintings, aspects of my father and aspects of our relationship emerged. He was a great carrier of history, stories and albums. One of my first memories as a child is of being at a table with his collection of Hungarian stamps. He was interned during the war in Hungary and collected 5 volumes of them, which he carried in his suitcase to England. Stamps are one of the great devices of transmogrification of the world into miniature. And in those albums, I saw cities, trees, flowers, animals, mountains, aeroplanes, and people. The world, enclosed, portable, and embraced. Christopher Bollas, the American psychoanalyst, writes in his book, Being a Character, about dreams and their importance in our lives. What he says about dreams, I feel, applies to images as well. The dream is an intelligence of form that holds, moves, stimulates, and shapes us. To be in a dream is to be held by the magical and erotic embrace of a forming intelligence. The space in the painting allows us to dream. It allows us, via the image, to enter into ourselves, to areas that hold, move, and shape us, and to areas that we have perhaps shut away and forgotten. In looking at images in painting, film, dance, images in books, poems, we allow ourselves to be processed by the shape and destiny of different art forms. That should be shape and density, but it could be density. Shape and density of different art forms and their particular idioms. The compressed language of dreams gives form to our feelings and thoughts at night. Images give form to our feelings and thoughts by day. And like dreams, we need them to survive and to be able to go on. In time, we abandon ourselves to reverie when we look at images. Whether we want to or not, we abandon ourselves to our unconscious when we look at images. We abandon ourselves to our family of feelings, memories, and the creative forces that evoke and articulate us. Like all of us, I'm always in my mind running into things and running out of them. Vast black holes, luminous gardens, frightened faces, rooms with views, empty rooms, uprooted trees, plans for cities, naked women and flying men. People sitting or standing by tables. A boy holding his father's hand. As every day, we weave the coming and going of our inner world with the coming and going of the outer world. We dream our life into being. Thank you.
Well, as Chairman of the Board of Governors, it's a great pleasure for me to be thanking Andrzej on your behalf. You've been a rapt audience, absolutely fascinated by your description of all the influences on your life and your development as an artist and a painter.
Thank you.
Not just college, not just home, but the influences of poetry and literature and all the other influences on you. It's been a moving experience to hear them. It adds to the exhibition, which we can see outside. We can revisit the pictures having heard your lecture. Congratulations, and to commemorate your professorial lecture, can I present on behalf of the University of Brighton this scroll.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can I invite you all to visit the exhibition and have a glass of wine or fruit juice or whatever, and really get the benefit of seeing the paintings in the context of this wonderful lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.